Hey everyone, Cursed Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and I'm back from my honeymoon and ready to look at some more decks. Right now we're looking at Hylda of the Icy Crown, a donation deck from Shirok. But before we get into that, some of you know recently I was on MTG Mudsta's channel playing my Eiley deck, and it's been uploaded. So if you want to see me play some Eiley, I'll put the link in the video description down below. It's a very, very fun game. I really enjoyed it, and I definitely managed to make some friends in the comments. So I very much so recommend you go take a look. But let's go back and take a look at our deck for the day. Hylda of the Icy Crown is a deck that I very much was looking forward to work on. It's not something, I saw this getting printed in Wilds of Eldraine, and I was really interested to see what we can build from it. So Shirok says, what needs improvement? Upgrading its power level and efficiency from the current bare bones structure build. And then the deck budget is $350. We're definitely going to see what changes we can do. I don't have a lot of changes to go into, but more general ideas of where we can kind of lead with it, thinking about win conditions and how to close out games. But as always, if you would like to send me a deck so that I can make a video on your EDH deck, there is a link down in the video description below. And if you would like your deck to be the next video I work on, there is a link for that too. Finally, the deck list we'll be looking at will be down there as well. This is also a great time to tell you to subscribe, do the YouTube thing. I would appreciate it. All right, let's get started. Who is Hylda of the Icy Crown, and why is she our frozen commander? We're gonna definitely let it snow. So, she is a 4-mana, white-blue human warlock 3/4. And she has one main ability, but technically it's like 3. She says, whenever you tap an untapped creature an opponent controls, you may pay 1 generic mana. When you do, choose 1. Create a 4/4 white and blue elemental creature token. Put a +1/+1 on each creature you control, and then scry 2 and draw a card. Now, something I really like about this this creature is that it's missing the clause you often see in these kind of cards, which is choose only 1 per turn. Now, the reason it doesn't have that, I have to guess it has something to do with the fact that you have to pay mana for the ability to go off. So we do have technically a upper limit, let's say, of the amount of value we can get in a turn or off a specific tap ability or a sleep or a freeze ability. So there is a limit, but within that limit, we can get a lot of value. Honestly, that first ability is the one that catches my eye the most. Creating a 4/4 for 1 mana is a fantastic rate, especially when the upper limit is pretty high, right? If you have an ability that will tap down, let's say 5 creatures and 5 additional mana, that's 20 power you can put on the board. And not even counting the fact that if you do this at instant speed, all of a sudden you can do this on your last opponent's end step and untap with a bunch of pseudo-hasty elementals, which I really like. Then that second ability, of course, gets more powerful the more creatures you have. If we're looking at it at pure power level, a 4/4 adds 4 power. So if we have 4 creatures, by putting a +1/+1 counter on each of those creatures, we get 4 power on the board as well. Even with that in mind, though, I think I generally prefer the extra 4/4s for a while. I think once I get to like 6 or 8, I might consider start putting the +1/+1 counter on each creature. The elementals themselves don't have evasion, and though some creatures in this deck do, generally I think we'll be happier with a wider board until the turn we're going to knock someone out of the game. And then finally, scry 2, draw a card, is the most straightforward value, as drawing cards is really, really good. Scry 2 is often thought of almost as worth 1 draw. So with scry 2 and draw a card, it's basically like drawing 2 cards. It isn't, but it's basically. And it's strange, and I think it's the weakest of the abilities, though I think the one that in a pinch you can always use if you're behind. And I think this is a really nice kind of combination. We talk about the win more quadrants a lot on this channel, and I think these slot in really, really good. The 4/4 is very good in neutral and when you're ahead. The +1/+1 counter is generally only good when you're ahead, and the scry 2 draw card is pretty good in neutral, but really good when you're behind and looking for an answer. So with all that in mind, I think this is a very well balanced commander. Not to mention at having 4 health is particularly good, as you know, you get to dodge a lot of burn-based removal like lightning bolts and the such. And the like, I should say. All right, so looking at the deck itself, this is definitely, I can tell it's kind of a bit further than a first draft. I like a lot of the directions on it, but there is a pretty straightforward problem, which we can see when we scroll down here, is our mana curve is a little wonky. We have quite a few 6 drops, we have quite a few 5 drops, and we have quite a few 4 drops in a deck that our commander is 4 mana. So starting with that, something that's worth considering about that is quite a large amount of our 4 drops do not function without our commander to begin with. And with that, I'm going to try to kind of attack some of these, because I think perhaps we may have gone a little too far into the sleep, quadrant here, let's say, where these cards are really, really strong, but they demand quite a bit of mana from us, right? Looking at sleep, for example, sleep taps, or even better, let's go a bit higher. Bond of Disciple taps down all creatures your opponents control. That's a lot of creatures. And then thinking of the amount of additional mana we need to use those tap triggers, right, in order to create 4/4s or draw cards or the like, it's really interesting that like this deck kind of necessitates a lot of ramp and a lot of mana. Something that we have quite a bit of, but I'm not going to say we have enough of. I'll be adding some myself. But with that in mind, looking at the 4 drops, I'm a little suspicious of some of them. So let's go through the 4 drops first, and then we'll look at the 5 and 6 drops, because I think the rest are generally good. So looking at our 4 drops, our commander obviously is very good. We have Lasarnak. I feel bad when it's the Lord of the Rings stuff, because I should know how to pronounce this. So when this creature or another human enters the battlefield under your control, tap a target. So I think this is fine because it generates a token every turn. And honestly, the most powerful cards in our deck are the ones that tap without having a mana cost associated with them outside of like the original cost. So our captain is 4 to cast, but after that taps a creature a turn, which means it's just easier to have 1 mana to create a 4/4. So I think this is pretty fine. Rhoda is whenever a creature your opponent controls becomes tapped, if it isn't being declared on attacker, this creature grows. So this is very similar to, let's see, to Gideon's Avenger, which grows as your opponents get tapped. But the only difference is, one, Gideon's Avenger counts them when they're attacking, whereas Rhoda does not. And then furthermore, the only difference is that Rhoda, I believe, starts with additional power and toughness because the Avenger's 2/2, yeah, and it has vigilance. Now, I don't think that vigilance is meaningless. I think that vigilance is fine. But as a card that's at the same mana cost as our commander, I'm a little suspicious. I feel like they just don't do enough, and though they are very much so a finisher, we don't really have a lot of efficient ways here to give evasion. So outside of tapping down all of our opponent's creatures, which, don't get me wrong, is possible, but not always possible, it is kind of hard to make these creatures connect. I guess something that's worth considering is that we can say, hey, Cursed, you know, our main thing we do is tap down creatures. We should be able to hit with this pretty often. And I think that's true, but I think my concern is that token decks are a really big problem for this deck, because both it is difficult to completely tap them down, and you know, they have blockers for days. So they have a very natural kind of defense against our deck, both against the 4/4s and very, very tall creatures. So I'm a little suspicious. I don't think it's the worst inclusion. Rhoda is pretty good. Obviously with partner, you draw a card as you play her, play them, I'm not sure, but I'm just a little suspicious. Okay, let's keep going. Charade of Numbing Depths. When it enters the battlefield, tap a creature, stun counter. If you tap one or more creatures, draw a card once a turn. I think this is great. Immediately, you know, you draw a card when this happens, and then once a turn, as you tap down creatures, you draw a card. Very, very nice. Tempest Caller. Okay, so Tempest Caller is one of those cards that I feel like is just a little outclassed by other creatures. Where we have other creatures that either tap down the entirety of the team or they tap down repeatedly. Tempest Caller is just a little too much mana for this ability, or a little too little mana if it targeted more. At 5 mana, we have Githzerai Monk, which I think is the very, very perfect version of this. It has flash, it has evasion, and it has a pretty good body at 3/2, and it taps all creatures you don't control. And I'm very much so willing to pay 1 extra mana for, you know, 2 of those 3 additions, or 4 additions, I guess I'm including the power and toughness. I think all that considered, you know, it's a very, very good deal, which in comparison, Tempest Caller just comes off rather weak and rather okay. Remember, we can't really use this as a defensive spell like we can with the Monk, and in addition, you know, we can use this politically to tap down an opponent to let other opponents attack with them, but 4 mana and ideally, 3 or 4 additional mana to be used at the same time, I don't really love it. Like, that's a very high cost for a creature that sometimes we need a blocker and we're just going to run out the Tempest Caller and get very little value from it. So I'm not quite a fan. Going into our sorceries. Distant Melody, I know this is out of order, but I believe the intended play of this is 4 mana. You name elementals, because that's the one you're probably going to have the most of. But because of that, that feels kind of win more. This card is only really good when you're ahead, when you have your commander out, and honestly, like, maybe neutral just at the end of you're getting out of neutral and you're getting into an advantage position, right? Because, like, to me, you stop being in neutral when you have more than 3 elementals. When you have like 16 power on the board that you're willing just to attack with every turn, all of a sudden I wouldn't consider you a neutral player anymore. And there, you know, when you're in neutral, if it's 3 and less, you're paying 4 mana to draw 3 cards, and I really, really don't like that. So this feels a little clumsy. I think if you really wanted to, there could be more of an effort to kind of solidify a creature type, but I'm looking through it and it's so difficult, right? There's really, like, I see some soldiers, I'm like, okay, that's a start. I see some wizards and merfolk, okay. I see some spirits, I'm going to suggest a few more spirits. Like, all over the place, it's really hard to kind of cut down into one creature type to take the most advantage of. And it seems generally, I don't know, it seems generally we're going to be gaining 2 to 3 cards off of this, and I don't think that's worth it. I would rather, honestly, I'd rather divination at this point, just so we can not be at 4 mana. Let's see. Okay, looking at our free spells, I definitely think Sleep, though it's my favorite, is the weakest and should be cut. It only targets 1 opponent, whereas Cone of Cold has basically a 50% chance to at least freeze down all your opponent's boards. And in addition, you know, there's that 5% chance. Actually, that's, yeah, 5% chance to like freeze them and the creatures that come into play. I think if they enter the battlefield tapped, you don't count as tapping them. I'd have to double check that, but I believe that's the case. So with that in mind, this is okay. I just do like that it hits all opponents. Likewise, I think Regna's Sanction is definitely a card that's very, very good, that I feel like it's a bit underused. It feels a lot like a better version of Bond of Discipline, because the card does actually read as 4 mana, tap down all your opponent's creatures. Oh, it's not all creatures. They keep one creature. Interesting. I have to make sure to keep reading this. Okay, that makes it a little weaker, but it's still... This is tricky. This is really tricky because I feel like this is pretty good because you're getting for free one of your commander's abilities, getting a +1/+1 counter on each creature, but you're not like... The sleep spell is only good as the remaining creatures that sleep can't target, right? And traditionally, sleep targets all creatures because it targets the player. Regna's Sanction doesn't target one of their creatures, and because of that, they're going to keep their strongest defensive creature up. Now, on certain boards, that's just not going to matter. I really like that spell against token decks because it doesn't really matter. But against people who go tall, people who are playing like Dragon Tribal or other, you know, +1/+1 counter decks, this is going to be pretty bad against them because they'll keep their 10/10, and though you can still rush them with 5 or 6, you know, elemental tokens, you're still going to lose one. You're still not going to get as much damage through, and it also magnifies if you try to attack each of your opponents. Like, one of the things that makes the sleep spells or the full opponent sleep spells really, really good is you get to then attack every single one of your opponents. And here you don't get to do that. It gets worse, right? If you target one opponent with all of your attacks, this isn't so bad because, you know, they can keep only one creature. And presumably you're going to attack the one that has the least amount of, like, the smallest creature that's remained untapped. But if you wanted to spread the love and like attack all of your opponents at once, that's 3 blockers you have to get through. I don't love it. So the more I read it, the less I kind of like it. So I think I would be pretty down to cut that as well. So Cone of Cold is the only 4 mana sorcery I particularly like here, just because at least Cone of Cold has a very high chance of freezing those creatures down. All right, looking at Aether Shockwave, I have a hard time liking the 4 mana ones. I wonder to what degree, first of all, obviously, if one of your opponents has spirits, this isn't great, but to what degree does one of those 2 mana tap 3 creatures? Like, is it going to make that much of a difference? Let's think of it this way. If we use one of those 2 mana instant speed, I think they're 1 and a blue, tap 3 creatures down. Then you have 3 additional mana. So 5 mana total. Means you're going to tap down 3 of your opponent's creatures and get 3 4/4s at instant speed. On the other side, if we have 5 mana and Aether Shockwave, one, I will admit, I really do like that it can possibly tap down all of your opponents on the last end step, but you only have 1 mana up after that, right? And with that 1 mana, what are we going to do? We're going to generate 1 4/4. Now, I'm picking 5 mana because I think that's the best number to look at, because it's the turn after we get Hylda out. So to me, I think I'm going to be much more interested in cards that are lower mana and still tap a rather like a good amount of creatures. And I don't think you're playing any of those. Let's go here very quickly. Let's say 2 mana. Let's say tap 3. Let's also say instant. Now, do they spell 3? Or I think maybe they spell the, yeah. So it's Downpour. Okay. Just the one, but Downpour I think is particularly good here in comparison to a lot of those cards. 5 mana, you generate 3 triggers and you pay for it. I think that's very, very cool. Recently, I've been very nostalgic to these old, like, I'm gonna call them core set art, where it's not art of a hero doing something cool, but just kind of like, this is a natural disaster or natural event that you can use as a blue mage. Maybe I'll start finding a cube for this kind of stuff. I really, really do like it. Okay, going back, let's finish off. So Biden of Thassa, I think it's great, works very well with your deck. Citadel Siege, I do really, really like this. I think this is definitely one of the strongest ones because it's each opponent's combat, which is more than each upkeep. Though you do have to wait a little bit to get that trigger. It is 3 triggers a turn cycle that you can then use to create 4/4s or draw cards. So I do really like Citadel Siege. And the reconnaissance mission, it cycles for 2, so I think that's fine. I think they're very powerful because they turn certain attacks into being very, very strong and gives you something to do with your smaller creatures that do not have a lot to do without, they can attack, but they're just not doing that much damage. Very quickly, before we go to the high mana cards, I do keep seeing, where are you? Prava, I should say. I don't really see this being that powerful here. I think turning the 4/4s into 5/8s feels good, but it's only on your turn. And in addition, it allows you to, like, we already have a pump ability on our commander. Because I think the idea of this is we have a few things that create 1/1s and the like the captain here. So turning them into 2/5s, for example, is a really good deal. But if we have enough of our creature tokens that we actually want to buff them, our commander does that with her second ability, and it'll also buff the non-tokens. So I don't particularly like Prava here. I think you could cut them for sure. All right, looking at our 6-drops. This is the place, I'm going to quickly look through the 5s. The 5s are okay. This is Palatian Accord is so great. I saw this and I thought that's genius. But going back to our 6-drops, this is where I think there's a few suspect cards. Our 6-drops are just a little too high. Let's go through them. So, Aboshan, Cephid Emperor. Tap and untap Cephid you control, tap target permanent. And then for 3 blue, tap all creatures with flying. I really do feel like we're using it for the second ability, obviously, though our Cephid here can tap down a creature. That's just still really, really clunky. This is a 9 mana ability because you really don't want to play this card out and then not immediately use its ability. But then, even then, that's 9 mana plus additional mana you would need to use your commander's ability. I think this is just too much mana. It's still a 3/3. It's very vulnerable to removal. Don't get me wrong, the ability to tap down permanents is really, really cool, but because this is your only Cephid, you're just not going to be able to do that in any meaningful way. So we'll toss that. Elegeth here, sorry, I forgot to click this one. Elegeth here, I think particularly is win more. It says whenever you scry, you draw instead. So this is very keenly with looking at the last ability on our commander. So all of a sudden it becomes draw 3 every single time, which is cool. But once again, Elegeth doesn't actually do anything to help this. This is purely kind of a win more piece. Like they don't tap down creatures, they don't scry themselves. So you need your commander out, you need this creature out, and then you need a way to tap down creatures and additional mana to take advantage of that in order for this card to do anything. Now it is a 5/6 flyer, that's still pretty good, but outside of very, very low power situations, I just cannot see this card doing any real work. So I would toss this for sure. Let's look. Subjugator Angel, 4/3, tap all creatures your opponents control. Now, I do like it, you know, once again, because it's not at 4 mana. It is flying, it has evasion. But I will just say, once again, the 6 mana is just a lot. It's missing flash. I think this is just too much mana, and you already have a lot of things to do at 6 mana, and there's a few other things I would rather do at 6 mana than this. Yeah, this is really, I think, not where we want to be, even though it is terrifying art for sure. Sun Titan. Sun Titan feels strange here. If we look, we do have 13 permanents with mana value 3, 11. So we have quite a few number here, but we don't have ways for these creatures to go into the graveyard outside of Selfless Spirit. So we're kind of playing Sun Titan extremely fairly. If we're looking here, spells. Yeah, the majority of our permanents that are 3 mana or less are mana rocks, which are even harder to toss into the graveyard. So with that in mind, I really don't like Sun Titan here, though we can get safe attacks out due to the fact that we can tap down creatures, and he is a 6/6. I just don't feel like Sun Titan is really doing enough, so I would like to cut them for sure. On the other hand, Sunblast Angel is very, very strong. I think already being just a really good board clear is already something I really like, but in addition, obviously, with all the synergy that we have, we can set up really strong turns where we've tapped down quite a bit of creatures on our opponent's turn, only to untap and play our Sunblast Angel, destroying all of them. So I think this is a great card, and I think it works really well here. So I definitely would say keep that. Moving on, Austere Command also feels clunky at 6 mana, but it is kind of a planar cleansing at times, so I'm not going to be too hard on it. It is notably kind of the fact that it destroys all creatures 3 mana or less when our commander starts at 3 mana, but our commander can grow our board. So what we can do is, if we get one of those +1/+1 triggers, all of a sudden we can for free use the destroy all creatures with 3 mana or less and keep our elementals and our commanders, which I really like. So you could do any 2, like obviously not the 4 or greater, but the 3 or less, and then all artifacts or enchantments, and you'd be probably pretty happy with the results, especially against token decks, which, as I mentioned before, we're particularly weak against. So really do like this. I think it's fine. But if you were to come up to me and say, hey, should I just use Wrath of God instead, or you know, a 3 mana or a different 5 mana board clear, I would probably just say yes. I think there's just, it is cool, but it is 6 mana. And the last one here is Thought-Weft Gambit, which is 6 mana, tap down all your opponent's creatures and untap your creatures. And I think, once again, I think 6 mana is just a little too much. I do think the fact that it is instant speed is nice, so you can use it as a kind of trap. You can use it politically by allowing one opponent to attack another and then casting this. But I don't know how much the untap all creatures you control clause really matters. When you think about the fact that, imagine, let's go back to Downpour. Imagine Downpour, right? Downpour says tap 3 creatures. It doesn't need to say untap 3 of your creatures, because the idea when we're playing this deck is that you can spend 3 mana and make 3 untapped 4/4s. So you don't need that trap function of this spell. It's already kind of built into our commander. So the fact that we're untapping our board is kind of moot, I would say. I just think it's a little too much mana for what it is. All right. So those are generally my cuts. There's probably a few others here and there that I think are a little suspect. Intangible Virtue being one of them, but also being very, very good makes me kind of say it's fine. So let's move into my additions. I have, let's see, about 9 additions, and I think they're pretty straightforward. The first bunch are about tapping, and the rest are kind of mana ideas. But let's get into tapping. Something I think is really strong in this deck is the ability to to tap down creatures without paying mana. I mentioned this before. Niblis of the Urn is like the perfect combination of these kind of things to me. First of all, they have evasion, which makes them a good attacker, and also they're very happy to, whenever you use your commander's +1/+1 counter ability, they grow really easily and they have natural evasion. I do really like that. And they say whenever they attack, you can tap down a creature. This is pretty good. This card will probably come down earlier than your commander, and what you can do that, use it politically in the meantime, tap down some blockers of one of your opponents, allowing your other opponents to get a few attacks in. Early on, there's usually not very many creatures, for attacking, but you can use this when there's like an early Thalia, an early Dark Confidant, an early Lotus Cobra. These kind of early value creatures are good at attacking and often are looking for a target. So attacking someone with Niblis and then tapping down a creature and telling your opponents, hey, you can attack them too, is not a bad political play. And then later in the game, this becomes a very, very good card, I would say. Likewise, Dream Shacklegeist at 1 more mana in blue does something very similar, except for our creature does not technically need to attack. You probably will anyways, because it is an evasive 3/1, which is particularly strong, but the ability to guarantee a tap is very, very good. And I do really like that. The freezing portion of this ability, I don't know how often you'll be using that. I think late game, it can get a lot stronger with certain targets, where you just cannot let them untap for any reason. And I think that's fine. I will say, for what it's worth, considering the amount of tapping down you can do, especially in the late game, I think it would be probably fine to just let it untap and tap it down again. But I'll leave that up to you to decide. Once again, I just do really like that every one of your turns you tap something down and immediately get a trigger off of your commander for no mana except for the cost of the trigger. So really do like this, and I really do think a 3/1 flyer is undervalued by players. 3 damage a turn, that's is it Mana Vault or one of those flip a coin, you take 3 damage. Like, those kind of things really, really do add up. So 3 damage a turn is very, very respectable. Then I have 2 tappers that provide something a little more interesting, which is not quite infinite, but a really good combo. So the first one is Junkwinder, and this one I like a little more because the mana cost goes lower than 7. But so this is affinity for tokens. It costs 1 less for each token you have, and as you might know, your deck is very good at making tokens. And this is whenever a token enters the battlefield under your control, tap target non-land permanent an opponent controls, and then you freeze it. So obviously, as you might be able to tell, all you need to do is, tap down one thing, pay 1 mana, create a 4/4, and then you've created a loop. For every time you have, well, as long as you have enough targets that you care about, but in addition, for having enough mana to continuously generate 4/4s, you will just start freezing everything down. And this notably hits non-creatures, right? Non-creatures do not trigger your commander, but it might be worthwhile, like on the last one, to freeze a mana rock or something. I leave that up to you to decide. Obviously, this works with other tokens that you might be generating. I think this is very, very good. This is a very, very good card. And considering that you could probably easily cut this down by like 3, maybe 4 mana, this becomes really respectable to cast. On the other end, in a similar way, we have Capsho Kitefins, an uncommon. I love when uncommons that aren't traditionally very, very good end up being very, very good. So this is a 3/3 flyer, and it says whenever this creature or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, tap a creature down. And obviously, not as good as freezing them. This is the weaker of the 2, but I think still very, very strong. You play this, or you play any creature, or you create a 4/4 and you tap down a creature. All of a sudden, you get a trigger, you create a 4/4, you tap down a creature, and so on and so forth. Once again, as long as you have mana, you're creating 4/4s and you're getting you're able to attack your opponents. With that in mind, if you were to play these two, maybe it's worth playing the Crashing Drawbridge, because there is, both of these do really, I guess not. I guess now that I'm thinking about it, it doesn't say during your turn. You just need to create your first elemental on your opponent's turns, and then you can just go ahead and, you know, get the army, untap, and attack. Okay, you don't need the haste. Okay, I think this is great. I think this is the level of, you know, 6 mana cards that I want in a deck like this, that allow you to really, really go off in one turn, create a giant army, and then, you know, threaten to take out 1 or 2 players the next turn. In addition, once again, this creature has evasion, and that means if you can put +1/+1 counters on him, you're going to be pretty happy with the results. So overall, pretty big fan of this. Then the last card that's not mana related I want to add is a little spicier, and this one is Hunted Phantasm. So this seems a little strange. It's a 4/6 unblockable that gives 5 1/1 red goblins to an opponent. Now, this deck is already kind of politically themed, so giving one of your opponents a bunch of attackers when you can tap down the other opponent's blockers is a pretty good recipe for success. However, there is an additional reason I like this. Something you might have noticed, a lot of the things we are limited by eventually become either mana, which we're going to address in a second, or a number of creatures to tap down. Hunted Phantasm creates 5 additional creatures on your opponent's side to tap down. And I particularly like that. I like that, you know, early game, you let them run around with the goblins, but later in the game, all of a sudden, you know, if you have 5 additional mana and a way to tap down 5 additional creatures, all of a sudden you're generating 5 additional 4/4s, right? And that's pretty intense. So I really like this. I don't want to tell you it's the best card ever in a deck like this, but I think it's really, really interesting. And so I think it's worth looking into. I actually had one more. These are artifacts. I assume they were all mana things. I think Lightning Greaves is definitely worth playing here. It's obvious that your commander is very integral to your gameplay, and once your opponents start realizing this, they're going to be very keen on shutting down your commander. And I know you already have a few defensive spells in Blacksmith Skill, Negate, for example, Shelter. I think you could also play Slip Out the Back pretty easily, or Dispel in addition, but I'll leave that to you. But Lightning Greaves, just because it's free to equip, this deck is very mana hungry, so I like it. Like, I'm not going to say get rid of the Swiftfoot Boots. I'm going to say probably play both, but the ability to give your commander Shroud, I think, is going to be rather important, as otherwise she's going to be targeted pretty heavily, especially by creature decks. I think a lot of people will be taken aback by her, by how fast she generates an army, but after that fact, they're going to learn to take you out. So having additional protection for her is important. All right, in terms of mana rocks, I have 1 change and 2 additions. Thought Vessel just for Decanter of Endless Water. Thought Vessel is just 1 mana less. Please play this instead. I do understand that it goes alongside the icy theme. Water turns into ice, but I think it's just better to play the more mana efficient one. Then 2 I want to add in is Worn Power Stone and Thran Dynamo. Both of these cards I think are rather good. The amount of mana they add is nominal, and honestly, if you stop thinking of them as, you know, this is ramp so that we can play, you know, Sunblast Angel faster, and instead thinking of them each generating that many additional triggers off your commander, they get a lot stronger. Worn Power Stone easily generates two triggers, and Thran Dynamo, because it comes in on tap, basically pays for itself in the meantime, but in addition, 3 additional triggers just by the Dynamo is really good. These cards allow you to play your Cone of Cold and Sleep style cards a lot better because you just get to hold up the Thran Dynamo with Cone of Cold and casting Cone of Cold, thinking to yourself, I'll have always at least 3 triggers that I can pay. And then if you have additional mana to sink into it, you will get that many more elementals. So I do particularly like going up these two just for having a little more mana, available to you. I saw that a few people were playing the mirrors. There's a cycle of mirrors that tap for mana, 2 mana, and they tap for mana. And I think the idea of that was that you could use it with your commander's second ability to grow them particularly quickly. I think that's really suspect. I don't think I would do that. You have an army in a can, and that is your 4/4s. I think I would lean on that the most. And I think in terms of things like Intangible Virtue, which I'm still okay with, but Prava, I think let the 4/4s be 4/4s. They're strong enough. They don't need more help, right? They're already an army. I think that's it. I think if we looked at another pass at this, the next things I would probably be talking about in terms of power level is our interaction suite, which is already very, very good. But the only way that we can kind of improve it would be to kind of go more into counter magic, kind of figure out more of the options we have. But I think this strategy is already kind of very, it's very card hungry. Like, it's very deck space hungry. We need mana, we need the ability to tap creatures down, and we need our commander. And all of those things get exponentially better as we, obviously not our commander, but the more mana we have, the better it gets. The more ways we have to tap creatures down, the better that mana performs, so on and so forth. So it can kind of, encompass a lot of the deck. So I think for now, with these additions, we're at a really good spot of the deck. Unless you have other things you want us to take a look at, I think it settles the deck into a really nice spot where I think mana, fixing up the mana, things like that would probably be the next step, or adding in generically good spells, your Esper Sentinels, your like Drannith Magistrates, cards like that, that everyone loves when I play Esper Sentinel. So those would be the directions I would go into. All right. I hope this video was helpful to you. Thank you so much, Hirok, for supporting the channel and sending in the deck. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's going to be very strong very quickly, and perhaps I'm overvaluing how quickly this deck can put out 4/4s, or how quickly this deck might get hated out with its commander being destroyed. But I do think that, especially in medium power pods, this deck will do very, very well and be very, very fun as well, especially with the political side. Much like how I like Brina, I like my decks to have a political side to them, because that means no matter the group, there's definitely some fun to be had in negotiating with the enemy. If you would like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. If you would like your deck video to be the next one I make, there's a link for that down below as well. And finally, if you could like, comment, subscribe, do the YouTube thing, I would be very, very, very happy. We're getting close to 400 subscribers, which is mind-blowing to me, really, really exciting, and I'm really happy to continue growing it. Speaking of which, I know this is the end of the video, but there's a few things I talked about before I left that I want to work on. I will probably have a better update coming up a bit later, as I have to fix my computer, and I want to invest in some things, improving sound and maybe a camera. So there's a few things to be done first, but we are getting there quickly. All right, good luck.